Hello, this is the Future Builders podcast created by Aluprof. We talk about the future of construction, architecture and design. Today we'll talk about the Active House project. My guest is Karol Klos, Managing Director of Forum Branżowe and co-creator of the Active House project. Hi Karol. Hello Paweł, thanks for having me. This is the first time I'm the host and you're the guest. We used to co-host a podcast. We've done over 200 episodes together, so let's be honest, we're thick as thieves. We are used to microphones too, but today we're going to talk about something we've never discussed before. That's right, I co-create a project we call Active House and a publishing house, mostly dealing with window, door and covering joinery. But Active House is very close to me. We also follow European initiatives in this area to learn from good examples and consider whether this is really the right concept. Just as I wasn't entirely on board with the passive house concept, Active House is right up my alley, representing what I believe is the future of construction. You mentioned the passive house. Active house seems to be the opposite. What hides behind the Active House slogan? It's not exactly the opposite, because a passive house focuses on its energy demand, while an active house is a house that actively responds to the needs of its users and to the events around it. So it must be well equipped with all kinds of sensors, including those in the joinery and coverings, but it should also provide you with all the status information about everything and trigger some kind of scenarios. Therefore, it's not a house that passively waits for what will happen, what the user will do, but one that reacts and actively supports their needs and habits, suggesting certain solutions. Active house is not just an idea, but also a specific house that has already been built. Could you say something more about it? Yes, of course. There are already two such houses being built. The first one is a modular showcase house that we have created to describe, record and present this concept. It's a small house in picturesque natural surroundings. We are finishing the fit-out works and the integration of control systems. The other house, on the other hand, it's more of a private initiative. I became so fascinated by this concept that I decided to incorporate it when building my own home. I'm moving in any day now, so I'll be able to say it exists pretty soon and works the way it's supposed to. The first programming, the first scenarios are already behind me, and it's incredibly satisfying when you come up with something and then you can see it all coming to life, because the design and construction took over 3 years. It took a while then. Tell me, what elements we need for an active house, or one that illustrates the idea you mentioned? Because as I understand it, it will be a matter of automation, a smart home as a form of sustainable development and naturally sourced energy. If you could say a little bit more about this. One of the basic elements is indeed automation, but as an element integrating all devices in the building and not something that says hello when we enter the house or makes coffee for us every morning, same time. That's more of a gadget-oriented point of view, while I focus on the energy dimension, on the usability of certain elements of an active house. So apart from automation, this includes all types of covering that influence whether the building heats up, whether it's covered, whether it consumes a lot of heat, whether it needs a lot of energy, but also all kinds of systems that are becoming more and more common and pretty standard for the new construction. Heat recovery, heat pumps, photovoltaics, energy storage, all integrated with lighting, signaling, alarm and cameras, so that the systems communicate with one another, exchange information, and make their operation dependent on the condition of the other device. For example, if we have reed switches in each window and I simply press the turn on button and leave the house, it should warn me, you left the window open, close it. Then the alarm makes sense. When I leave the house, I should be able to put heat recovery at a lower speed with a single click. The heat pump will then reduce the amount of heat produced, and we can temporarily lower the temperature and, of course, control the energy. What should happen with it while we're away? Should we export it to the grid? Because maybe the hours will be good, but if the rates are unfavorable, maybe at this point we should store the electricity for the evening and let it all happen on its own, taking into account the way we use our home. And this is where the whole aspect of supporting the user in using this home comes into play. But not in terms of gadgets. For this scenario, where I'm leaving home, press a button and my house is already preparing something for when I come back, but rather in the context of taking into account the multitude of devices we have at home, and the number of elements we need to remember, the entire checklist before we leave, not even every day, but for the weekend or to go on vacation. All this can come true with the help of this house and its mind, so to say. The elements you mentioned don't sound like rocket science. You said yourself that some of them are now basically a standard. But since we are talking about the future, I'd like to ask you whether an active house can be the future of single-family housing. Should all buildings move in this direction to make it the standard of the future? I'd say this is still a high standard or maybe quite a utopian one. But it's possible. Utopia may be a wrong word because it suggests it won't happen, but if someone wants to find the barrier to this kind of systems with the things that are already quite widely used, it turns out it's not science fiction anymore. But a simple building management system, that is, for example, integration of covering systems and heating, air conditioning and heat recovery systems, we are talking the amounts of around 14 to 1600 euro. And we'll also get funding for this house management system because there are such programs, and therefore the qualification threshold is very low. But two issues arise here. First, users' awareness that a smart home is not just about opening everything with a remote or a phone, because it's not about the phone. And the second issue is the serious problem of contractors' unawareness, because there is no such institution or person on the market who would be an integrator, a person who would connect all the things we have at home or help us plan the house in such a way that all systems would be compatible with each other. Therefore, although most of them are compatible with one another, you still need to figure out how to connect them. And unfortunately, each of them performs their own scope, their own element in the building, without thinking how it will work as a whole. So there is still a lot of work in building awareness of the participants in this construction process. However, when you listen to the opinions of architects, those who are more conscious or those who actually want to change something, I feel that we're heading in the right direction. Or perhaps one day it will become a standard. When it comes to the perspective of the next, let's say, by 2030, so the next 5 or 6 years, I'd say it will become more and more popular, but not a standard yet. Such a house must combine many, I'd say, extreme elements, because on the one hand it must be open to its residents, the garden, the space, and on the other hand it must be a shell that cannot be cracked by burglars. It must be a house that will heat up effectively in winter, but also cool the space effectively in summer. How to reconcile such contradictory tasks for such a house? It involves modern joinery or coverings which fulfill the role you mentioned. Let's take joinery. I have completely given up on internal motion detectors in my house. Why do I need a motion detector inside the house if, to get into the house, you first have to break the window? So the window has an alarm loop and a reed switch too, and I'll get information about it. I don't need for the system to be duplicated with motion detectors that, in my opinion, can be unreliable. I'm not saying they're all like that, but they can be unreliable. But the same goes for, to sum up the topic of joinery, these windows allow you to have contact with nature, with the world. In my case, we are talking about lift and slide windows that allow me to get out to the terrace. It's both a barrier for a burglar and, for me, contact with nature, this openness to the world, paradoxically. The same goes for coverings, or in my case, facade blinds, which control the level of sunlight in the house, while giving some kind of privacy when I need it, or covering what is happening inside when I'm not there. Alternatively, of course, roller blinds that, by controlling sunlight or giving information about the sun's current position, can control how much light gets inside. As a result, they protect the building against overheating, and in winter, they lock the house, creating a kind of air cushion and preventing heat from escaping the building. So these well-known popular systems fulfill all these functions and are able to reconcile such extreme needs. It's only a matter of the appropriate scenario and planning, how and with what they should cooperate. In this case, like I said, with an alarm system or with the position of the sun. Active house as a project, or a little house because it's not big, right? Yeah, at that time, according to the regulations, you could only have 35 square meters. So with a mezzanine, it's probably around 40 square meters. It's a really small house. So this small showcase house, and we added our 2 cents to the project because as Aluprof we provide windows, doors and coverings. Let's talk about these partitions for a moment, because it's really important and public awareness about these products is probably low. Large glazing might seem to mean that we're losing a lot of energy, but that's not the case, and combined with coverings we can manage the building's thermal mass very wisely, correct? Definitely. The requirements for the current construction industry since 2021, they seemed to be difficult to achieve, but it turned out it's possible. These requirements are so restrictive that even large glazing doesn't result in significant heat loss. Sure, it's not a full solid wall covered with polystyrene or mineral wool, but it's still a compromise that I think was required in a passive house. Often, in order to achieve very high parameters, these houses didn't have windows. I can't imagine living in a house with no windows. That's not a house, but a special institution where people are locked up against their will. I cannot imagine a house without access to light, to nature, to the surroundings, with easy open access to the terrace, which somehow optically enlarges the space of this tiny house. In my opinion, that's why there was or there is a slight flaw here in the pursuit of the primary energy demand of buildings, or rather in the pursuit of reducing this parameter, this demand. Therefore, in my opinion, a very good compromise here is a highly energy-efficient house, maybe even zero energy if we produce a lot ourselves, combined with energy-saving joinery. All of this appeals to me more and is closer to me as a person who also comes from the window and door joinery market. This house uses very different solutions to show a number of possibilities, this wide range, but the common denominator is the issue of management, so that the airflow and temperature are consistent with your objectives, the way you program your scenario, and the way it is then implemented. How does it work in practice in the context of windows, doors and coverings? One of the elements here is, for example, the entrance door, which is equipped with a keypad connected to the automation system. So if I forget the key, because the key is always an alternative, but if I don't want it, I can use the NFC tag or a code. By entering the code, I not only unlock the door, but if I enter the appropriate code, I'll also shut off the alarm or put the house in the appropriate mode that I set, let's call it at home. And this mode means that heat recovery will be turned on at the appropriate speed, that, say, a window can open because we have a lift and slide window with a drive. We also have fan coil units and a heat pump that can also react to our presence. All this happens when disabling the alarm or opening the door. If, for some reason, I forget or don't feel like going downstairs from the mezzanine, I can also program an appropriate scenario that will close the windows and coverings. If I remember correctly, we have both a facade blind, a roller blind, and another roller blind on the other side because we have an exposure on both sides. The largest window, or two windows, because one is the lift and slide system, and next to it there is the accordion, or this folding system, if I remember correctly. Well, they're also on the south side, the sunniest part, and there, controlling the sunlight by opening the covers is, I'd say, crucial to heating the building. It's on a hill in a very sunny spot, so it can get very hot inside. And since it's a modular house, the walls are filled with very hard foam, with a high thermal transmittance parameter, which means that if I heat it up, it will be difficult to get rid of this heat. We'd have to use air conditioning, which again consumes energy. It all comes down to ensuring that the condition of joinery and coverings reduces our demand for various kinds of energy and also does not cause unnecessary collisions. Because why would I ventilate the house using heat recovery if I have a sliding window open? The information from the window tells the heat recovery or the fan coil units whether they should activate at all. Why should I heat? Okay, the temperature has dropped. The sensor has detected that the temperature has dropped. But if I want to turn on the heating, I should close the door first. Or in this case, the sliding doors. In my opinion, it is also quite important that we are talking about significant savings here. Because if we support the heating of the building by raising the covers when we need it, or when we want to cool it down, we will close them. It is support and savings, both in terms of heating, but also in the summer we forget to cool the rooms. Definitely. That's why, in my opinion, it's a mistake that in thermal modernization programs, coverings are very neglected. I think it's a matter of a year or two, I hope, that it changes. And they really have an actual impact on how much energy we use to cool or to heat the house after we've cooled it down. So the coverings definitely have a real impact on how much energy is consumed by air conditioning, heat pumps or heat recovery. Because these devices would be working pointlessly if they were autonomous and would not cooperate with the preset mode of all the other devices in the house. This active house is actually a perfect symbiosis of many elements because on the one hand we have energy to power the automation and the entire building, as well as support through joinery and heating and cooling coverings, and security, because we can lock the building remotely if we forget something. So it's secured when we are away from it, and we can monitor its condition. How to synchronize it all? Because you said there are no experts who would integrate these systems. You have knowledge on this topic. You knew what systems to buy, but if our viewers were interested in this topic, where should they look for support? I'd look for companies that offer automation, and I'd verify how wide a range of devices and products I can integrate. We are reaching a point where most of the systems offered, be it Windows, coverings, gate drive systems of all kinds, are open to other protocols. A new standard called Matter is emerging. I think it will also become more and more popular in Poland. It will allow you to integrate even more devices. And now we need to verify whether the energy management system or automation system we want to use will allow us to open up to foreign systems. In my opinion, if it's limited only to its components, it's a big mistake. And that's not a device for an active house. You're right, I learned all this, but it was because there was no one who could give me advice and help me. I had to go through some training. I had to learn how to connect cables, how to program, and actually, my house, all the wiring. I told the electrician how it should be done. I created the design, and in the end, I programmed the house and integrated all these systems with one another. So I went through this process because I believed in this concept. And it gives me great satisfaction, but our market is really missing people who would integrate these systems. One solution could be to talk to a company that specializes in automation, but then it will obviously be a bit more expensive than regular electrical work. Another solution, when looking for specific systems, for example, covering systems, heating systems, photovoltaic systems, is to check whether the person who makes them can integrate them with other devices, offer a wider range of solutions. That's also an option, because there are companies that, when doing photovoltaic installations or heat pump installations, can connect it to the lighting, blinds, and other systems we have at home. Active House, both as a showcase house and your private house, is nearing completion, and you will soon be finishing both projects. Is this concept, this idea that you said has pushed you to delve into these topics and educate yourself, has it let you down at any point? Have you thought at any point, is this form over substance, should I let it go? Were there moments of doubt? Yes, of course. They were the moments when I would get the invoices for individual elements, because during the pandemic it was already starting and many components, especially electronics, weren't available right away. And they would arrive in batches. If I got it at once, paid and forgot about it, that would be bearable still. But it would come in batches, and there was a moment when I had doubts whether that wasn't form over substance. But when the installation started, when I assembled the entire electrical switchgear, which is quite a large cabinet, that was a moment of satisfaction. Another moment of great satisfaction was when the first automation elements started to react to one another. And I could control, come up with a scenario, enter it into the computer, and then see how it works live. That's such deep satisfaction. I don't think it's a case of form over substance. Of course, you can go really crazy and build the home management system itself for 20 or 40,000 euros. The only limit is your imagination and your wallet. Unless you're building with a mortgage, then it turns out in the end you can't afford the furniture. But if you plan it well, what should be in the house if you design it well? What's to be included and how it's supposed to work? You can prepare for it in advance, or you can slightly adjust your appetite to how the house is growing. Are there any elements of an active house that did not work, that could be discarded or turned out to be the Achilles heel of the project? I haven't found one yet, but I think it can happen. It may turn out that certain types of sensors or certain types of elements were not necessarily the right ones. I haven't found such an element that would make me think. Of course, I have some kind of gadgets, which are less about functionality, energy saving or safety, and more about the wild satisfaction of not having to get up from the couch to open the door. So there are also some gadget elements, but there are definitely very few of them in the scale of the entire project. As I said at the beginning, I haven't found any such elements yet, any defective ones that I would regret using. But I will make sure to let you know if I think something was a mistake or an unnecessary expense. So let's now turn this thread around and list the elements with which we should start, because let's say there is an investor who heard about Active House, likes the idea, wants to implement it, has a limited budget. Which elements are a must-have? Oh wow, that's a difficult question. See, I even had to change my position to answer it. That's why I left it for last. One of the first elements is how we approach construction, how we design houses when building the house. I first thought about the plot I liked, meaning I didn't have it, this house. There was no design, there was an idea for a plot. Will this plot allow me to locate the house facing the directions that interest me, that is, south and west? But in terms of photovoltaics or scenery and physical aspects, in terms of views and practicality, I want to have a very sunny terrace. I want to have a lot of light in the house, but I don't want this terrace to be at the front. So the back of the house must be facing the southwest, and the front of the house the northeast or north. And that's where it started. So if that's the case, my house will overheat in the summer, then I need covering. At the same time, I must take into account where and how I'll place the photovoltaic installation, because this side is also exposed to sunlight. I still have to think whether this is the right side for installing some kind of wind sensor or dusk sensor. Probably the western side would be good for this. Moving forward, at the building design stage, I already know that this plot is suitable. I can already imagine more or less how the house will be located. So I have to think about how it will be heated. This is an essential element of home design. Then, will I have heat recovery or gravity ventilation? If gravity ventilation, how much heat will escape through these chimneys? It's as if throughout the construction process, from the stage of selecting the plot through design, before we get to the electrical system, everything is already decided. But we don't pay attention to it because these are quite trivial decisions. Being like, okay, I have gas installation, which means that gas will probably be the cheapest, without analyzing it too much or delving into it with this rather bold assumption that gas will be the cheapest. We made the decision to choose a gas boiler. We are not thinking then, can I connect it somehow to other elements? How will it consume power? That's why I'm saying the design process itself took me almost a year, with the agency that was very competent and efficient. But it also involved issues regarding, for example, window and door joinery, where we knew there would be a large space open to the garden at the back of the house. This, let's call it private space. Then we knew we needed a flush threshold. And then comes another issue that had to be taken into account at the design stage. What the height of the floor is, how to height the threshold, what kind of window system it will be, and what height will the threshold be in order to adjust it, and therefore to adjust it to the terrace and match the terrace with the level of the plot. Lots and lots of decisions. Only imagination and our goal at the end should determine the decisions we make along the way. If my goal is to build a house that I will move into in a year, it won't be possible to build an active house, or we won't be able to think this process through well. But if we're not under pressure to live there in a year, and we want to design our own house, even if it has to be a bought, adapted design, if we want to do it well, it needs to take some time. You cannot do it in 10 months or 8 months of the construction season. Active house is the future of single-family housing? We don't know, but I think it's our wish that these types of buildings become common and that they make our lives comfortable, that they work for us and cooperate with us. My guest was Karol Klos, Managing Director of Forum Branżowe and co-creator of the Active House project. Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you. It was a pleasure.